Warning! This episode of Data and Dissonance contains discussion of alleged fraud, government oversight failures, and ongoing federal investigations involving public funds. Some topics include accusations, court cases, media coverage, and public statements that are still under investigation or disputed. We will reference reporting, official filings, and publicly available information. But not all matters discussed have resulted in convictions, and some claims remain contested. This show does not accuse entire communities or groups of wrongdoing, nor does it presume guilt outside of documented court proceedings. Listener discretion is advised, not because this conversation is dangerous, but because it challenges narratives, examines uncomfortable facts, and asks questions that are often avoided.
For years, we were told this wasn't happening. For years, anyone who raised concerns was told to stop asking questions, stop looking too closely, stop noticing patterns, stop asking where the money went. And now, suddenly, the files are missing, the stories are changing, the cameras are shaking, and the people who were supposed to reassure the public can't seem to finish a sentence. This isn't just about daycares, it's not just about food programs, it's not just about autism services, Medicaid billing, housing assistance, or emergency pandemic funds. It's about a system that expanded faster than its safeguards, a political culture that confused oversight with bigotry, and billions of taxpayer dollars that were handed out with trust instead of verification, and are now being clawed back under federal scrutiny. Over the past week, we've watched press conferences derail in real time, watched officials freeze when the word fraud comes up, watched claims of break-ins and missing records surface at the exact moment audits tighten, and watched the conversation shift from "this isn't real" to "how dare you ask about it." That alone should make anyone paying attention pause. Tonight, we're not here to chase viral clips for cheap outrage. We're here to slow this down, separate what's proven from what's alleged, look at where the oversight failed, why whistleblowers were ignored, and how fear of optics, fear of accusations, fear of being labeled, created the perfect environment for abuse, because compassion without accountability isn't compassion. And silence in the face of fraud isn't tolerance, it's permission. This is Data and Dissonance. Let's talk about what happens when the receipts finally matter. All right, let's bring in the crew, because this conversation isn't meant to be handled from one angle, one ideology, or one comfort zone. First up, as always, is Daniel, the guy who lives one layer deeper than the headline, one thread past the official explanation, and one uncomfortable question ahead of everyone else. Daniel doesn't just look at what's happening, he looks at why it's allowed to happen, who benefits when oversight goes quiet, and what patterns emerge when accountability suddenly becomes taboo. When systems fail, Daniel's the one asking whether they failed by accident or by design. Next to him is Brian, bringing the MAGA fire, the blunt force, honesty, and the unapologetic defense of the American taxpayer. Brian doesn't sugarcoat, doesn't slow walk, and doesn't pretend that intentions matter more than outcomes. When working families are footing the bill and Washington shrugs, Brian's here to call it what it is, not with buzzwords, but with frustration that a lot of Americans feel and aren't allowed to say out loud anymore. Then we've got Rachel, our independent voice, the balance point in the room. Rachel cuts through spin from both sides and asks the question that actually matters. What's real, what's being exaggerated, and what's being conveniently ignored? She's not interested in viral outrage or partisan theater. She's interested in facts, accountability, and whether policies actually protect the people they claim to help. When things get heated, Rachel's usually the one grounding the conversation back in reality. And joining us as well is Skylar, bringing the progressive perspective, not to play defense for institutions, but to challenge narratives, push back on overreach, and remind us that systems failing real people isn't just a conservative concern. Skylar focuses on healthcare, social programs, and the human impact, asking who gets hurt when fraud happens, but also who gets hurt when fear turns into broad blame. She's here to argue, to challenge, and to make sure this conversation doesn't collapse into easy answers. And I'm Artie, your host, not here to tell you what to think, but to make damn sure we don't stop thinking just because it's uncomfortable. Tonight isn't about picking villains for sport. It's about accountability, transparency, and whether our institutions can survive if we keep pretending questions are more dangerous than corruption. Before we dive in, I want to be clear about what this segment is and what it isn't. This isn't a hit piece, it's not a social media reenactment hour, and it's not about dragging entire communities into the mud to score political points. What it is about is something far less flashy and far more dangerous. A system that handed out enormous sums of public money with minimal guardrails, then reacted with silence, deflection, and nervous press conferences when people finally started asking for receipts. Because when oversight fails at this scale, it stops being a paperwork issue and starts becoming a trust issue, and once trust collapses, everything built on top of it starts to crack. Over the past few years in Minnesota, we've watched fraud cases tied to public programs move from isolated incident to pattern, from daycares to food programs to medical providers, autism services, Medicaid billing, housing assistance. All roads pointing back to the same uncomfortable question. How did this grow so large without someone stepping in sooner? And now, just as federal audits tighten and funding freezes hit, we're seeing missing records and break-in claims. Viral clips of officials freezing mid-sentence and a media narrative that suddenly wants to focus more on how people feel than on where the money went. That timing matters. So in this segment, we're going to slow this down. We're going to separate what's proven from what's alleged, what's documented from what's being spun, and what questions are fair from which ones are reckless. We're going to talk about oversight failures, political pressure, fear of accusations, and why that fear may have created the perfect environment for fraud to thrive unchecked. And we're going to do it the way this show always does it, with different perspectives in the room, disagreement where it belongs, and zero tolerance for pretending this is all just a misunderstanding. Let's start right there, because this didn't happen overnight. This wasn't a single bad actor slipping through the cracks. This was years of money moving through programs with almost no friction, almost no verification, and an unspoken understanding that asking too many questions was politically dangerous. And now we're told to believe that all of this, the daycare fraud, the food program fraud, the Medicaid and autism service fraud, the housing assistance abuse, are somehow disconnected coincidences. Daniel, when you step back and look at this as a system instead of a headline, what do you see?
What I see is a classic institutional failure pattern that repeats every time ideology replaces oversight. You build programs fast, you expand eligibility fast, you flood money into communities under the banner of compassion. But you quietly remove enforcement, because enforcement creates optics. And once people learn that audits are soft, consequences are rare, and regulators are scared to push back, fraud doesn't sneak in. It moves in comfortably. The reason this exploded in Minnesota isn't because people suddenly became greedy. It's because the system advertised itself as exploitable. And now that federal audits are tightening, suddenly we've got missing files, break-in stories, officials freezing mid-sentence when the word fraud comes up. That's not random. That's pressure hitting a structure that was never reinforced.
And that's the part that pisses people off, because regular Americans don't get that grace. If you screw up your taxes, the IRS doesn't care about your feelings. If you misreport income, they don't pause because of optics. But here, billions of dollars go out the door. And when people finally say, "Hey, where did this money go?" the response isn't accountability, it's emotional deflection. Suddenly it's, "How dare you question this?" Or, "This conversation is harmful," or, "This makes people uncomfortable." Yeah, fraud should make people uncomfortable, especially when it's taxpayer money meant for kids, for families, for people with real needs. And instead of shutting it down early, leadership looked the other way because they didn't want to be called names.
I think both of you are hitting something important, but we also have to be careful not to let outrage outrun evidence. There are confirmed cases. Feeding our future, Medicaid billing fraud, autism service abuse. Those are real, prosecuted, documented. But there's also a lot of viral content floating around right now that muddies the water. Clips without context, press conferences reduced to 10 seconds, speculation stacked on top of speculation. The danger there is that when everything becomes proof, nothing actually is. And that's exactly how institutions dodge accountability. They let the conversation spiral until the public tunes out. If this is going to lead to real reform, the focus has to stay on where oversight failed, who ignored warnings, and why safeguards weren't enforced. Not just who looks bad on camera.
And this is where I want to push back a little, because fraud doesn't exist in a vacuum. It happens inside systems that were already broken. Medicaid, autism services, housing assistance. These programs are underfunded, understaffed, and chaotic even before fraud enters the picture. That doesn't excuse abuse, but it does explain how it happens. When providers are overwhelmed, oversight is thin, and communities are desperate for services, bad actors can exploit gaps that were never properly closed. What worries me is that the response to this could end up hurting the very people these programs were meant to serve. Families who rely on care, kids who need therapy, people who genuinely need housing support. Accountability matters, but blanket suspicion and funding freezes without precision can do real harm.
And that tension right there is the heart of this entire story, because on one hand, you've got documented fraud at a massive scale, and not rumors, not vibes, but court cases and indictments. And on the other hand, you've got real people who depend on these programs and didn't do anything wrong. The problem is that Tampon Tim and Ilhan Omar, who married her brother, didn't draw that line early. They didn't aggressively root out abuse while protecting legitimate providers. They avoided the issue altogether. And when you avoid enforcement long enough, you don't just get fraud, you get chaos. You get distrust. You get the public wondering if any of this was real.
Exactly. And once trust collapses, the damage spreads outward. Audits don't just examine finances, they examine credibility. And when federal investigators show up, they're not just asking, was money stolen? They're asking, who knew and when? Whistleblowers have been warning about this for years, and instead of being elevated, they were sidelined. That tells me the failure wasn't just technical, it was cultural. People were more afraid of accusations than they were of corruption. And corruption thrives when fear sets the rules.
And let's be real, if this were happening in a conservative-run state with conservative leadership, the media would be wall-to-wall calling it systemic racism, corruption, incompetence, all of it. But because of who's involved and where it's happening, suddenly it's complicated, suddenly it's nuanced, suddenly we need to slow down. No, we needed to slow down before the money went out. Now we need answers, not vibes, not press conferences, answers.
Which means the next phase matters more than the outrage phase. Audits, prosecutions, reforms, and transparency about what went wrong without scapegoating. If Minnesota doesn't handle this cleanly, it's not just a local issue. Other states are watching. The federal government is watching. And the public is watching whether accountability actually means something or if it's just a talking point when it's politically convenient.
Before we wrap tonight, quick reminder. If you want to support this show, support independent media, and help keep conversations like this alive without corporate filters or political handlers, head over to the Data and Dissonance merch store. We've got the coffee, light roast, medium, and dark, roasted right here in the USA because, yes, even your morning cup deserves standards and accountability. We've got hoodies, hats, mugs, stickers, gear that lets you rep the show without screaming for attention, just quiet confidence. Every purchase helps keep the lights on, helps fund production, and helps us stay independent. No donors, no PACs, no talking points emailed down from anyone. If you believe conversations like this matter, that facts matter, and that asking questions shouldn't come with a permission slip, that support makes a real difference. Links in the description. And seriously, thank you to everyone who's already been backing us from day one. This story isn't uncomfortable because it's complicated. It's uncomfortable because it exposes how fragile trust really is when accountability is treated like a political liability. What we're watching in Minnesota isn't just a fraud investigation. It's a stress test. A test of whether institutions can admit failure without collapsing into defensiveness. A test of whether leadership can protect real people while still drawing hard lines against abuse. And a test of whether we, as a public, can demand answers without letting outrage turn into noise. Fraud doesn't become widespread because everyone involved is evil. It becomes widespread when systems reward silence, punish whistleblowers, and train people to believe that enforcement is somehow cruelty. Compassion without accountability doesn't protect the vulnerable. It leaves them exposed when the system inevitably breaks. And when that break happens, the damage doesn't stop with missing money. It spreads into distrust, polarization, and cynicism that makes reform even harder the next time around. What happens next matters more than what already happened. Audits matter, courtrooms matter, transparency matters, and so does resisting the urge to reduce serious failures into memes, clips, or tribal talking points. And if leadership wants trust restored, it won't come from press conferences or emotional appeals. It'll come from receipts, reforms, and consequences applied evenly, without fear or favoritism. We'll keep following this. We'll keep asking questions. And we won't stop just because the answers make people uncomfortable. That's it for tonight. This is Data and Dissonance. Remember to speak truth, stir thought.
Tonight's episode of Data and Dissonance is brought to you by the Caleb Rourke Thriller series, because sometimes fiction is the only place left where accountability still exists. If you're tired of watching real-world systems fail upward, bury mistakes, and dodge consequences, the Caleb Rourke books take you into a world where corruption doesn't get press conferences. It gets confronted. These are high-stakes political thrillers rooted in intelligence work, power struggles, covert operations, and the uncomfortable truth that institutions don't collapse all at once. They rot slowly, quietly, and then all at once. Book 1, The Covenant Protocol, drops you into a world of classified programs and buried decisions that were never meant to see daylight. Book 2, The Prophet Directive, raises the stakes, pulling back the curtain on how ideology, influence, and silence can be weaponized at the highest levels. And now out, Book 3, Black Echo Rising, where the consequences finally come due, because nothing stays hidden forever, no matter how badly powerful people want it to. These aren't escapist novels, they're reminders. Reminders that systems only work when someone is willing to challenge them, that truth doesn't surface on its own, and that silence is always a choice. If you like your thrillers grounded, intelligent, and uncomfortably close to reality, you'll feel right at home. You can find the Caleb Rourke Thriller series on Amazon right now. Links are in the description. Supporting the books supports this show, supports independent creation, and helps keep Data and Dissonance exactly what it's supposed to be: unfiltered, unbought, and unafraid.